Hi, this is Bruce Rawles, and I'm speaking again today with Susan Dugan. And we're going to talk about what the Holy Spirit is and what it isn't. And thank you, Susan, for suggesting that very helpful and uh, practical topic.
Thank you. Well, I think probably the emphasis of our talk is more on the what it isn't,
Hmm.
um, because that has been I think I think when we come to the course, we people may be bringing their own sort of, as we all do, whatever our own religious background was, or even if we weren't raised in a formal religion, sort of maybe ideas about terms like the Holy Spirit or Jesus.
Hmm.
And the course is never talking about those really, the terms in the course are completely different from biblical references or
Absolutely.
religious references and the different
Hmm.
ways that those have evolved over the years in different sects of Christianity and so forth. Um, but I think the real point of what was sort of prompted me in this direction are a couple of things. One is that I both Jesus and Holy Spirit are symbols in the course. They're not literal again. They're not really literal references in Christianity. They're really about they're symbols of the part that loving, all inclusively loving innocence and presence that is the truth about us. Undifferentiated union is a way of saying that eternal union that is our reality, and embraces all minds, all hearts. And there are no bodies in that. That is the reality of us, and whatever, if the abstract wholeness of God and love of God, capital L, love of God, in the course's way of portraying that. But um, but that's not where, we had into eternity where all was one. There crept this tiny mad idea, the course says, that we could have a different reality than that. What would it be like to be separate from this and be an individual entity, basically? And so that had no reality, but because we experienced a sense of guilt over that, and took it seriously, there was this, um, we fled the mind, so to speak, and seemed to entertain this possibility of all of that happening in all these different scenarios of lifetimes that we're engaging in, and different personal selves that we seem to be engaging with. And then we're experiencing all this lack and so forth. And so we're in this dream state, in quotes, that many non-dual paths reference, right? That there's, that this is the reality that we think we're living, the life we think we're living is really a dream, and not the reality of that wholeness, that one loving wholeness that we've sort of shut out, we've disassociated from. But in this case, the Holy Spirit in the Course is used as a symbol of of sort of the intermediary between, the dream, where we think we are, so it's still present within our mind. It's that memory of that one loving presence in our mind, and where we really are, which is within that one loving presence, right? But that seems, we're totally oblivious to that now in the dream. And so, but we do have that memory within our mind. And so that's really what the Holy Spirit symbolizes. And the Course is trying to get us back in touch with, is that we're making choices constantly based on this personal identity, and that and constantly trying to fill the lack that we feel from this sense of loss over wholeness, and then also to get rid of the guilt that we feel because we believe we experience ourselves as here in the dream as personal selves with personal identities and uniqueness and needs, and physical needs, emotional needs, and all kinds of obstacles in our path, and a fight for survival at every turn that we seem to encounter. So the Holy Spirit in the Course is sort of the way that this different point of view that's available within our mind. and is represented as at the beginning, which is a very long stage of the spiritual journey back to the mind, as this guide, friend, teacher, loving, older brother, parental figure, whatever you want to, something that we can trust that will help lead us, that knows that we're still loved and loving and knows the way out of the pain that we're in the dream, right? And can help lead us back to a better way of, through a better way, experiencing a better way of relating to each other that is free of all of this neediness and sense of anger and failure and regret and constantly feeling like we're unfairly treated, but can lead us back, little by little, back to the mind by changing our mind about our relationships, within the context of our special relationships, right? So so I think that the Holy Spirit, though, as it's often practiced in the Course or misunderstood in the Course, is more as sort of a helper in the dream in specific forms, in ways, that if that and I think, I mean, that's what organized religions have really done with that idea too,
Mm-hmm.
is, that if we're asking for God to help us, to rescue us, that we're sort of, you know, we're portraying ourselves and believing that we are powerless, um, and at the forces, real forces of all of these turbulent things that are happening in our lives and problems that we have, and asking for divine intervention all the time. And that's, that is maybe where we start at what the Course call, in the Song of Prayer pamphlet calls the bottom of the ladder, but that's the very beginning, and it's not where we want to stay. We want to be able to move up the ladder and begin to recognize that we are choosing this from where we have always been, which is outside the personal self, outside the dream, of the impossible dream of individuality, and that, we're always choosing between either the healed perception of the Holy Spirit or the, completely confused and selfish perspective of the ego and the frightened personal self, right? The guilty, this sinful personal self that has, a need to constantly get rid of its guilt by portraying it, by seeing itself unfairly treated, right? And portraying itself as the victim all the time. So, but unfortunately, I think that what happens and from the very beginning, and Ken Wapnick talked a lot about this, people have mistaken it, the Holy Spirit, especially as, um, as something else, as sort of a new form of a new and perhaps more evolved form um, of divine intervention, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is aware of the dream and will help us in the dream and will help us see, what we need in the dream, and then, help us come up with ideas for how we react in the dream and so forth, with very specific advice. And, that's really not, it's not even really possible, because it's, again, there are no needs from that perspective,
Mm-hmm.
right? But there is what it can give us, when we begin to want to, begin to question our, alliance with the ego, our alliance with the personal self, and begin to, raise to doubt some of our conclusions about what's happening in the dream. And when we're willing to ask for a better way of relating to each other, because there's a recognition that my way is not working, it's unloving, and I feel unloved and unloving. At that point, we are opening the door to this part of our mind that we had slammed the door shut on, and that loving presence, our willingness to get our own perspective out of the way and open to that loving presence, then whatever, might be helpful may come to us in some kind of idea of a form, but it's certainly not about the form. It will always be some expression of shared interests and knowing that we're all in the same, we're all fighting the same hard battle of trying to find our way home and believing that we're not lovable and we have this terrible need to to affirm our specialness, that I'm unique. I have to be unique to you, to this special person. And if you can't give me what I want, then there's something wrong with you, right? We have to turn it on each other. And no one can give us what we really want because what we really want is to go home to to the love that we never left. And so the only way that we can allow love to be really loving in our relationships is to get out of the way, to get my neediness out of the way. And we don't know how to do that by ourselves. And so that is that is where the Holy Spirit, Jesus, is helpful. That symbol that there's a part of my mind that is all loving and innocent and can guide me in that sense, to a new perception, to a healed perception, and thereby a different experience of seems to be going wrong in the dream, that will be kind to myself and kind to others. And I won't have to figure out how that's going to strategize how I'm going to make that work. It will just kind of fall in, that will flow from me. It might not solve the problems. It might not even reach the other person at that point,
Hmm.
seem to. But at some point, we're told that, and we take on faith that you know, the need of every heart is to heal that self-hatred that we're all carrying, that guilt that we're all carrying, and that it is always received, even if it's not received in, time is an illusion from that perspective. And only the eternal, within the eternal, nobody fails the course or any other spiritual path. So, yeah.
Well said. Yeah, everything you said, I completely resonate with, and just you very eloquently stated, what the Holy Spirit is and isn't. And I was, as you're saying some of that, I was thinking, well, it, in maybe putting in slightly different words, one of the things that the Course admonishes us to avoid is trying to bring the light into the darkness,
Right,
and that metaphor, I think, really is kind of encapsulated or epitomized by the idea of thinking that the Holy Spirit is some sort of you know uh, superhero avatar that's going to come into our dream and fix the dream and remedy all of our space-time problems. And as you were saying, the whole point of the course is to have us wake up from the dream, not
right,
repair it. And so yeah, just given that premise, it shifts everything because Holy Spirit, like as you're saying, is a symbol of that part of our mind that wants to wake us up from the dream we made, and it can't do that by reinforcing the idea that the dream is going to work.
right, right.
Um,
And it's a process, right?
yeah, yeah,
It's not, we don't want to wake up,
right, right.
So,
And we've talked at lengths
but,
about resistance,
right.
which
So,
is
so,
still enormous. Yeah.
right. I mean, the practice of forgiveness, the Course's form of forgiveness, which is the, raising to doubt, looking at all of these fraught reactions that I have and all this defensiveness and worry and anger and stress that comes up for anyone trying to make it here in the dream, right?
Mhm.
Make it through. Um, and the sense of abandonment and betrayal and the sense of neediness and that of otherness that we get into with all the different points of view that people have, and the need to be right and all of that. It's really just kind of raising that to doubt, seeing that it's I'm in so much conflict all the time. The workbook introduces us to paying attention to what
Yeah.
our thoughts and feelings are, um, and that's just the introduction. That 1 year training program is just an introduction to beginning to live our lives in a questioning manner, and to raise to doubt my reactions, the cause of my reactions, not not to deny my feelings, not but to really actually own them, and because we need to own them before we can recognize them or question the cause. We need to stop covering them over. And so we begin to be very aware of all of that, by watching um, our reactivity. And through that process, we begin to realize that um, it never works. It never works, it just we solve one problem and then there's another problem. There's no one that can meet that need and nothing that can meet that need. Nothing
Mhm.
that I say I want ever works for really more than a nanosecond.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
to begin to be sort of aware of that and to and to learn to ask for help from this part of our mind, or in the sense of opening to it. I would like to see things differently, right? I would like to I could see peace instead of this. The most basic levels of forgiveness are less than 5, right? I'm never upset for the reason I think,
Mhm.
which raises the whatever my reaction is to doubt. What is the real cause of this? Is it really because of what this person just said, or this email that I just got, or this thing that I tripped over and broke my leg, or whatever like seems to be, or this thing that is happening again on the news, or is it, could it be coming from a different place? Not to say that the behavior is okay, or that it's to deny that it's perhaps even horrific, but it to recognize that my reaction to it, the responsibility for my reaction to it, is completely on my mind,
Mhm.
and has nothing to do. I could still see peace instead of this. There's a part of my mind that Holy Spirit, Jesus it's just the symbol, the terminology that the Course uses, but it's a symbol, and it's just that loving presence. There's a part of my mind that I want to grow up into, right? By shedding this other part of my mind that's really not serving anything. And that, that presence is with me always. And I can, by my willingness to step back and get that, recognize that maybe I'm wrong about this. I open to that other presence. And that it's just that process of doing that over and over and over throughout your day. And we get to do it a lot because the more aware we become of our reactivity, right, the more we experience the shift that we have when we're willing to do that. And the more patient we become with our own resistance, and wishing I could make it work out here, but realizing that it's not what I really want. We have those experiences of love and a peace that's not of this world, however fleeting, when we are able to get our egos out of the way, and we know that that is what we've been looking for, and we can't. No one else can give us that. Nothing else can give us that, right?
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
It's what everybody's yearning for. The need of every heart.
Yeah. Yeah. As you were talking about the two steps of forgiveness and the two workbook lessons that Ken emphasized so many times about 5 and 34, I was thinking of the outer and inner shields of oblivion, and how basically I have to ask Holy Spirit's help. And again, that part of my mind, the symbol for that part of my mind, to make the correction. The Holy Spirit really is just a correction.
Right,
Ask that part of my mind to help me see that I've been using my mind to project the unconscious, unfounded guilt onto the world, and that hasn't worked,
right.
and I'm still miserable. In fact, in the which section is it? Oh, the happy learner section. It says, he needs happy learners, but first we have to notice how miserable we are,
Yeah,
and have to be really, like you say, own that and be upfront with that. In our minds, it doesn't matter who we share it with externally, but internally, if I can just acknowledge the fact that if I'm really not making this horizontal switching from illusion A to illusion B to illusion C ad infinitum strategy that the ego is the endless goose chase that it sends me on. If that's not working, and I keep projecting the guilt onto some other handy target moment to moment for my distress and upset. If I can generalize that and see that that's not working, eventually it's like, well, okay, what's left where's that bridge that I thought I burned? Well, that's the bridge back to the mind. And then every ego says, I don't want to go there because that's where all the horrific stuff is. And Holy Spirit says, metaphorically, take my hand. We'll look at that together and see that that was nothing too. The guilt wasn't there either. We made up the whole thought
Right,
system as well as the projected world. And so Holy Spirit is our guide through both of those steps. And then in lesson 23, it says, and Holy Spirit takes the third step, and we just don't. Our task is not to interfere, which is the replacement of the the grievance with the peace that's waiting there for us.
right, right.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. I mean, and our special love relationships, and hate relationships
Hmm.
are so grounding in this dream,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And so, we're not asked to give those up, but that's really where the real work of this comes in.
Hmm.
And and I think we just become a lot more aware of the traps of specialness, of how it, how I've used it in my life in ways that we're not loving to myself or others. We all do that, because we try to manipulate each other to get those needs of ours met. And
Right.
there is that need that we still feel. And until our mind is completely healed and we're really um, at the top of the ladder and really not identified with the personal self as being what we want,
Mhm.
that will continue to come up. But along the way, we really learn the you know w- that the specialness was not what we thought it was. It wasn't really serving us. And again, that sense of I definitely have had a lot of times in the last year or two where I think a lot about you know. The ways that I've used that's played out with my relationship with my daughter, with my husband, with my dog, with my different relationships, um and that we all do that when we're blinded by guilt that is unconscious, but it ultimately, we want to learn to love in a different way, with an open heart that is not making demands on others, even if, we may not have been making overt demands, but there's always those subtle demands that we have of each other in almost every relationship that, is at all enduring. And it's and so it just keeps the game of guilt going back and forth. And at some point, you just realize that I just really don't want to play the game anymore. It's just not it's not kind.
Hmm.
And we learn to, we kind of learn a different kind of kindness that is really about, freeing, that we all have that same freedom to choose, to give to others and ourselves, by finding this loving presence in our mind, by opening to it. And then we don't have to be in this struggle and battle for over love and over trying to prove our own relative innocence, that by making the other person feel guilty, the situation feel guilty, this all of the issues I've been dealt, right? And we have it really shifts the way that we can move through life, in a more kind and gentle way. So yeah,
And it is a kind, gentle inner teacher. I sometimes think of
totally.
Holy Spirit as an inner kindness teacher, and that word kind is so helpful because
Hmm.
when when we look at the neediness that we think we have, and we've convinced ourselves that we haven't, which is certainly, legitimate on the level of form. Um, with that infinitely patient, gentle, kind part of our mind, it doesn't uh, scold or reprimand or censure in any way. It just says, see what you're doing with your mind and notice how when you drop that, even just for a moment, or question the validity of what we think we need, we feel more peaceful.
Mhm.
Yeah, the secret of true prayer is to forget the things we think we need is what is in that song of prayers. That's kind of like my one word or one sentence summary of that pamphlet, and I find that really helpful. Is if I can just be willing to question what I think I need, that takes me out of even just for a moment that the ego's constant battleground of
Mhm.
trying to manipulate the dream, trying to adjust to the insanity of the projected world that I made. Yeah. How,
Right,
how about
right.
if we read a little bit of the what is the Holy Spirit section?
Yep, let's
Uh,
do it.
Okay. I think that ties into what you were sharing really nicely. I'll just read the first paragraph. This is section 7 in part 2 of the workbook. The Holy Spirit mediates between illusions and the truth. Since he must bridge the gap between reality and dreams, perception leads to knowledge through the grace that God has given him to be his gift to everyone who turns to him for truth. Across the bridge that he provides are dreams all carried to the truth, to be dispelled before the light of knowledge. There are sights and there are sights and sounds forever laid aside, and where they were perceived before, forgiveness has made possible perception's tranquil end. So, Holy Spirit is basically the mechanism by which we begin to consider forgiving ourselves and setting aside trying to make illusions make us happy, that notion, right?
Right, and
Yeah.
just and sort of again that intermediary between the body and the world,
Yeah, yeah.
illusions and the body and the world and the mind, right? Which would
Hmm.
be illusions versus truth, reality versus dreams, right?
Hmm.
And it is that yeah, again, it can't be extinguished, and so it's that memory of where we are and what we are, and that doesn't have boundaries or needs or any of that. And that doesn't mean in the world that we don't do the normal things and that we don't still have relationships again. And, the Holy Spirit doesn't take the Course tells us, take our special relationships away. He transforms them, and meaning that He heals our mind about them. He helps us heal our mind about them, and they're not, um, in very literally, the other person is a part of me in the sense that we're all fragments of the same decision-making mind, or if
Hmm.
you wanted to put it in different terminology than the Course, the one heart, right? The heart of God. So, that it's a very radical and very, probably, Ken in his later years a couple of times said that he doesn't, it's probably way ahead of its seeming time, in that sense. But it still is, it's also aligned with, the highest kind of non-dual teachings that speak of the same content,
Hmm.
but different ways of getting there. The Course really uses Western psychology terms and all of these beautiful metaphors from Plato and from, Helen, who was the scribe, Helen Schuckman, who was the scribe of the Course, loved Shakespeare. So there's a lot of Shakespearean references in it, a lot of Platonic philosophical references in
And
it,
plenty of Freud.
and lots of Freud and
Yeah.
and then biblical stuff, and that can be
Hmm.
very off-putting to people.
Right.
But it's not, the forgiveness that the Course talks about, just like the terms Holy Spirit and Jesus, has nothing to do with the world's forgiveness, which the Course calls forgiveness to destroy, because it just is about, saying you really did this heinous thing to me, but because I'm the more evolved person, I'll forgive you for it, and which only ends up making the other person feel even more self-hatred and more angry, and we never get out of that loop. So this is really forgiveness of what never was,
Right.
that we're living an impossible dream, and it's impossible that the one child of God, the one heart is capable of all of these atrocities that we're seeing.
Hmm.
And they're until we know that, we work with it here in the dream. And we hope that we learn it, but the course is not about behavior, it's correcting it at the level of the mind. And that it doesn't try to jump into the dream, and fix it there, because again, that it's a dream.
Yeah, exactly. The dream
And just like
repair
our
is,
sleeping dreams,
yeah,
everything in my dream is me, right? It has nothing,
mhm,
you may appear in my dream, but you're coming from my mind. So whatever I have you doing in the dream is a choice that I'm making at the level of the mind. And that's why the Course uses that analogy. It's not, I am the dreamer of my dream, and that, I'm choosing the scenes, and I'm choosing how I want to react to them at any given moment. Right.
every moment is a choice between ego and Holy Spirit.
Right.
And that's I think one of those fundamental ideas in the course, that it becomes a meditative process, not just that we do in special situations with incense burning and New Age music or all the cliche, but if I can remember, every moment gives me an opportunity to identify with Holy Spirit, which is our real identity. There's a line in the last part of lesson 302 that this second paragraph, I think, really epitomizes our relationship with the Holy Spirit, that we think of it as outside of us, but what we really are is um, a reflection of that when we're in our right mind. Anyway, it goes, our love awaits us as we go to him and
Mm,
walks beside us, showing the way. He fails in nothing. He the end we seek, and he the means by which we go to him. So at the
right.
top of the ladder, our identification is completely with the correction rather than the error.
Right. We
Um,
become the Holy Spirit in that sense.
exactly,
Where
exactly,
we, right,
exactly. Yeah.
right.
Meanwhile, we've
Or
got our work cut
Jesus.
out for us.
Yeah. Right, right. And I mean, yes,
Yeah,
this is
yeah,
very difficult. and
yeah,
and but I think the reason that those of us who have stuck with it, for quite a long time, and keep practicing is because it does take you deeper and deeper. It's a process, and you begin to experience the right mind.
yeah,
And so, even you can be having a ridiculous ego attack and just be like, furious with someone, and yet there's a part of, like, because we've been practicing for such a long time, there's part of us knows another, there's a part of me that thinks otherwise,
yeah,
and I will have the experience of thinking otherwise, because so we can't really depart from the answer quite as far
right.
as we once had, where we almost
Exactly.
obliterated it, right?
Yep.
And we know that healing and peace lie in that direction, and so it's inevitable that will pass.
Yep.
And so we're less judgmental of ourselves for our ego attacks, and more patient, because we will return, to to kindness, and that will include to ourselves, because same,
Yep.
right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
We've got about 2 minutes left in the recording.
Okay.
I was just going to just briefly mention, after 13 years ago, I put my second book out, which is sort of a mix of metaphysics in the what's called sacred geometry. It was sort of my transition to doing just course stuff, and the pure metaphysics. So I just released an online glossary that's heavily cross-linked to the web edition of the Foundation for Inner Peace's version of the
Great. Yeah.
course. And I was just going to read the entry that I have for the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit is the thought system in our mind that corrects the ego thought system, replacing every thought of duality with thoughts of sameness and forgiveness. there are only two thought systems and only one Holy Spirit is real. While we believe we are separate from perfect oneness, the memory of our real, undifferentiated, undivided identity remains in our mind, awaiting our invitation to awaken us from our dreams of specialness, differences, sin, guilt, and fear, and guide us home to where we never left, through forgiveness back to unchanging peace. And then I've got links to Jesus, appointed friend, bridge, universal giver, and there's lots of others. There's 895 instances of Holy Spirit in the Course, and there's a link to that. And then I've put a handful of appropriate Course quotes that have the Holy Spirit in it. So anyway, it's the website is at glossary.acimblog.com. And
Great.
anyway, so thank you, Susan, as always.
Congratulations. That was a long project that
Yeah,
didn't
two or
labor
three
of love
years
and
and,
truth.
and very collaborative. So anyway, thanks
Excellent.
again and great insights and look forward to the next conversation.
Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you.
Always a pleasure.
Likewise. Bye for now.